Who announced this? The rise of Cyrus and his request beforehand, long ago. Would God declared it of old? Was it not I, the Lord? And there is no other God besides me, a rigidly and uncompromisingly just and righteous God and Savior. There is none besides me. Verse 22, look to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God, and there is no other. David said in Psalms 121, and we shall say together, I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. He will not suffer my foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel, he that keepeth the commonwealth of the Bahamas, shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is thy keeper. The Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. He shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth and forevermore. Isaiah 45:22 is a promise from Almighty God for all of God's children, yea, the nation of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. It is a standing invitation from our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. But it is our duty to look to Him and not to any other God. To look to Him is to love Him. To look to Him is to trust Him and have confidence in Him to bring us through our challenges in life. When we truly look to Him, we shall be saved. The Greek word for save is suso. Now, what does the word suso really mean? It means to save, do well, to deliver, to protect, prosper, to heal, to preserve, to make thoroughly whole. When we look to Him, Jesus Christ, He will save us. He will deliver us from all evil. He will protect us from all evil, seen and unseen. He will cause us to prosper. He will cause us to be in health, even as our souls prosper. He will work miracles for us. He will make a way when there seems to be no way. Commonwealth of the Bahamas, it pays to look to Jesus Christ, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. Shall we look to the Lord in prayer? Heavenly Father, we thank You for Your wide and various promises. We thank You for sending Your beloved Son, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, to this earth to save us from our sins over 2,000 years ago. Now, Lord Jesus Christ, we honor You, we love You, we appreciate You. We thank You for all the good things You have done for us and continue to do for us, Your people. We thank You for choosing and sending our leaders to this honorable House of Parliament to serve in their respective places and capacities and to be guiding lights to Your people in these challenging times. Now undertake for the several necessities of our nation and our people throughout the length and breadth of our nation. Bless and protect our leaders and their families during this Yuletide season and always. Bless and protect our law enforcement agencies. Bless and protect our teachers and students during this Yuletide season. Bless and protect Your Christian church and leaders. Bless, protect, and prosper Your people everywhere. In Jesus' name, and we pray the prayer You taught Your disciples to pray, saying, Our Father, in heaven, hallowed be Thy name, Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. For Thine is the kingdom, power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Have a wonderful day.
Good morning, honorable members. When the business of the House suspended, we were at item 6 on the order of business, statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marco City.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to, as always, acknowledge the people of Marco City, the organization whose banner I carried in that constituency, and most importantly, my mother and saints who have stood in the gap for me, petitioning God to watch over and provide guidance in my deliberations. Mr. Speaker, I rise to report on the government's participation in the 4th meeting of the African, Caribbean, and Pacific Group of States Ministers of Culture meeting. The meeting was held in Brussels, Belgium on the 9th and 10th of November. Leaders of the ACP nations have for years recognized the importance of the development of cultural and creative policies and strategies. In 2012, these leaders gathered in Equatorial Guinea to affirm their commitment to the role of culture in national development. And they adopted the watchwords, which will no doubt inform what we do in the Bahamas, that there is no future without culture. I, along with the Director of Culture for the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture, and a minister consul from the country's Geneva consulate, attended the 2017 meeting as a part of the CARICOM bloc of countries. Mr. Speaker, our continued participation in this meeting is vital to our leading role in the development of the creative and cultural industries in the region, which incidentally, Mr. Speaker, is one of the fastest growing segment of national economies, not just in the Caribbean, but internationally. While a portion of the 2-day summit was spent reporting on progress made since 2012, a primary focus of the Bahamas delegation was to pursue funding for the region in general, the Bahamas in particular, and to explore where we might provide or receive technical assistance. Mr. Speaker, more specifically, we were present to do a number of things. One, promote the work that we are doing in the Bahamas to grow the creative and cultural industries and to advocate for our own funding and technical assistance needs. Two, to interact and exchange ideas, policies, and best practices. Three, to identify partners for the exchange of creative and cultural industries, policies, legislation, and ideas. So, Mr. Speaker, these three primary objectives, we believe we were quite successful in making progress on behalf of the Bahamian people. Since the 2012 meeting, it is unfortunate that at the ACP level, Mr. Speaker, that progress has not been as quick as ministers would have hoped in terms of building the capacity of the cultural sector, increasing the flow of information in the cultural and creative industry sector. And 3, in circulation of cultural professionals, products, and services. However, tremendous strides were made to correct those deficiencies, inclusive of having concrete discussions on making visas more accessible within ACP countries and sharing of information through databases and other platforms. Mr. Speaker, what was especially useful for the Bahamas is to witness the use of software that would create an inventory of all the cultural artists, heritage sites, as well as products produced in various jurisdictions, and to be able to identify what the contribution is of the cultural and creative industries to national development. The scarcity of statistical information in the Bahamas and in this region has held back the growth of the creative industries, and we believe the partnerships we are forming within the ACP will help us to correct this deficit. I'm proud to say that in keeping with our continued leadership in the region, we are on our way to building a regional database for sharing of information. The ministry has already been in the process of gathering information locally, regionally, and globally. And of course, to promote, we are absolutely committed to promoting the participation of women in particular and youth in the creative industries. Mr. Speaker, just recently a delegation from my ministry visited Cat Island with the view of cataloging heritage sites, products being created on Cat Island, as well as various artisans and artists who might be promoted nationally and internationally. Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that the ACP group of states has a $40 million endowment from the European Union. Seizing this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, I had an opportunity to enter into private discussions with the Secretary General, raising the issue on whether a portion of that endowment might be earmarked for cultural purposes. The Secretary General agreed to consider this and to structure how these funds might be dispersed. This would mean new financial resources for our creative and cultural communities to support national and regional policy to drive the Orange economy agenda. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, while in Brussels, we work to forge new partnerships with ACP member states. In particular, we saw an uncommon opportunity to learn and exchange with South Africa, a country with which we had enjoyed a close relationship previously, as exemplified by the Nassau Accords, which we celebrated in October 29, 2015. Mr. Speaker, we believe that there is a great deal that we are able to gain by deepening our relationship with ACP countries in general, South Africa in particular, Fiji that is running, we believe, a very robust program in promoting and further developing their fashion industry, and a number of sub-Saharan African countries who are doing a remarkable job in gathering statistics and allowing the statistics to drive policy decisions. One such example was the tremendous growth that we are now witnessing internationally in the African film industry that we believe will be very useful in helping the Bahamas to brand itself as a film destination. And of course, Grand Bahama will be the leader in this regard. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work to build information exchanges and gather evidence on which we can base the expansion of opportunity to women and to young people in particular, and of course all of our creative industry and cultural practitioners in general. We believe in this administration that it is possible to grow this economy through culture, and that it is a means not just for national development and solidifying one's identity, but it is a concrete means of us earning a living and increasing our income. And so, Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I wish to say that we believe that every trip taken by government officials, they ought to give an account for what the nature of the discussions were and how they believe the investment of the people's money would benefit the country in the long run. As I end this communication, Mr. Speaker, I wish once again to extend my condolences to the family of Ronnie Butler, a cultural icon in this country who has no doubt impacted every one of us in this chamber and in the gallery, but also Bahamians throughout the length and breadth of the Bahamas. And to say resolutely that I stand in solidarity with the cultural artists, because in my view, Mr. Speaker, I'm a community worker and cultural artist who just happen to have been elected to Parliament and appointed to the Cabinet. And it is important that policymakers, the private sector, recognize that culture is not an adjunct to other things. It's not an appendage. It is not frivolity. It is not on a program the thing that bridged the gap between the main items. It is one of the main items. And toward that end, I recommit myself to promoting the legacy of Ronnie Butler and persons like him, and ensuring that culture is at the centerpiece of our discussion on national development.
Further statements and communications by ministers. Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Further communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Southern Shores.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members of this honorable House of Assembly, good morning. I wish to be ever thankful to Almighty God for my presence here, and not forgetting the good people of Southern Shores who actively participated and ensured that I'm here this morning. Mr. Speaker, I rise to say a few words about the Bahamas Maritime Authority. I had the distinct pleasure this past week of being in London to contribute to efforts geared towards the Bahamas securing re-election in Category C at the IMO. The Bahamas would have been a member of the International Maritime Organization since 1976, and we would have held that seat in Category C from 1991 to 95, and then again from 1999 to present. But Mr. Speaker, I would have come to appreciate, since being the minister, that the maritime industry is not sufficiently known in and about the Bahamas. Whenever we hear the word maritime, many of us may simply think of a ship going out to sea. And I think of the many years that we would have talked about the need to diversify the economy, the many years we would have discussed means by which we could increase employment, particularly for our young persons. I've come to appreciate over these past few months that that opportunity exists around us in abundance. As an archipelagic nation, every time we look out to sea, we should think of the abundance of opportunity that there is out there for us. As I stand here, I can say without fear of honest contradiction that 95% at least of the world's productions are shared, are sold from nation to nation, but they are transferred by sea. Someone sent me a WhatsApp message the other day, and there was a picture of the Titanic, and then behind the Titanic was a picture of, I think, the oasis of the sea. And it only brought to mind that the Titanic, which in 1912 was seen as the greatest ship out there, is now dwarfed by the cruise ships and other large tankers that are out there in the international seas. And so it says to me that in just the same way as the size of the ships would have increased, that the opportunities are increasing. But Mr. Speaker, I will come back here at a later time with a more extensive communication. I just want to take this opportunity to table the annual report of the Bahamas Maritime Authority and to say to this honorable House that we have been successful in being re-elected to the IMO. And as I take my seat, Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to say that on the local scene, I'd like to say to our family islanders who depend heavily on the mail boats that I have been meeting with mail boat operators, and I have their assurances that this Christmas season, everybody in the family island will get their ham and turkey on time. So I beg leave, Mr. Speaker, to lay the annual report from the Bahamas Maritime Authority on the table.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document will lie on the table. Further statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I am always fond of doing in this place, I rise giving praise and thanks always to Yahweh Elohim, the Lord God Almighty, and to the good people of Bamboo Town who've elected me to this place. Mr. Speaker, I also take the opportunity to recognize at this point in time, sitting in the gallery, Mr. Chester Fawkes, who is the Commodore of the best regatta this year. He was the Commodore last year. He's also the Commodore of the Long Island Sailing Club and has been the Commodore for the past 18 years. Mr. Speaker, my colleague minister would have spoken about culture, and he would have spoken about the great cultural icon, Ronnie Butler. And Mr. Speaker, I want to announce to the House, as I did to the press and to the public, that the best of the best regatta will honor Ronnie Butler. The government of Bahamas will honor him under the direction of our esteemed Prime Minister. We will honor Ronnie Butler for the cultural icon that he has been. So every artist are the best of the best. Every Bahamian artist, and we only have Bahamian artists, are going to sing a song from Ronnie Butler over these next 4 days. Tonight, Wednesday night, which is the Sailors' party. Thursday night, which is racing. Friday night, Saturday night, and on Sunday. All 4 of those days, Ronnie Butler will be honored. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to bring to Parliament a communication concerning the best of the best regatta. And Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resource, in collaboration with the Star Sailors League, will host the second annual Best of the Best Regatta in Montague Bay from the 7th through the 9th of December, 2017. We have planned a number of activities that are intended to showcase Bahamian culture to the world. On Monday, at Government House, I had the honor to meet the administrative team and athletes of the Star Sailors League, the SSL. 50 sailors, Mr. Speaker, from 24 countries, including France, Sweden, the US, Brazil, Great Britain, Italy, Germany, Poland, Argentina, Russia, Finland, Norway, New Zealand, and Croatia is here in country. Mr. Speaker, the world is in New Providence. The participants say that among them, those countries, they have enough Olympic athletes, enough Olympic medals to sink a ship. Mr. Speaker, like other major sports such as hockey or baseball, the SSL circuit ends each season with a grand finale race, which is called the SSL Finals. Placed above all other competition on the circuit, due to the level of participation, the SSL Finals are the best endowed in terms of prize money and are heavily rated on points, the equivalent of a Masters tournament event in tennis. Competition in this event against the best athletes in sailing is a major achievement in the sailing community. And Mr. Speaker, this is happening at Montague as we speak. The SSL Finals are reserved for the highest SSL ranked sailors, as well as the exceptional sailors invited by the SSL League. Based on their sailing pedigree, their races started yesterday and will culminate on Saturday, as culminate the following day on Sunday. I am privileged, Mr. Speaker, to welcome Mr. Michael Nicholas, founder and owner of the SSL, and Commodore, Senator from France, Dr. Louis Paris, and all of their athletes. I also thank the Nassau Yacht Club for the cooperation it lends to coordinating our events. Now, Mr. Speaker, with regard to the Bahamian sloop sailing racing, the public will enjoy intense competition among the A-class, B-class, and C-class Bahamian sloops. There are among them, and I want to reiterate, 41 sloops competing, Bahamian sloops, 41 will be competing over the next 4 days. Last year, Mr. Speaker, there were 16 Bahamian sloops. So the competition this year, Mr. Speaker, has significantly expanded, and we all know the success that the best of the best was last year. The competition was open to all sloop owners and sailors and has registered participants from New Providence, Grand Bahama, Long Island, Exuma, Auckland, Ragged Island, Andros, Cat Island, and Megona. All of the races will be live streamed via the internet and on Facebook pages of Bahamas Local and our regatta desk at the ministry. With the SSL, Mr. Speaker, we anticipate that the live streaming done by the SSL League, it will bring to us a combined global viewership of this regatta of over 1 million persons this weekend. I thank our sponsors, Paradise Games, Commonwealth Brewery, and Janae's Uniform, and the inter-ministerial committees that has worked tirelessly to ensure that we maintain the gold standard that the best of the best has set for the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I now take this opportunity to invite all of the Bahamas to either come out and partake of all of what the best of the best regatta has to offer, or to simply tune in. Mr. Speaker, through you, I invite all of my colleagues and members in this place to come out and see the best sailing, the best music, and food that our Bahamas has to offer. Mr. Speaker, as that old Bahamian song says, it's regatta time again. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Further statements and communications by ministers.
Mr. Speaker, there are none.
Communication by the clerk. Thank you. Message from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. The Honorable Senate, acquaints the Honorable House of Assembly that they have passed the following bills accompanying messages 3 and 4 dated the 22nd, or rather dated the 2nd of November 2017, and number 4 dated the 8th of November from the House of Assembly. Order that the messages do lie on the table. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentations of petitions. Presentations of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First readings of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House and for first reading a bill for an act to consolidate and strengthen measures to recover the proceeds and instrumentalities of crime and to combat identified risks.
Is there a second? Second. Order that the bill be brought up. It's been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to consolidate and strengthen measures to recover the proceeds and instrumentalities of crime and to combat identified risks. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
And strengthen measures to recover the proceeds and instrumentalities of crime and to combat identified risks.
For the first reading of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table and have read for the first time the bill for an act to repeal and replace the Financial Transactions Reporting Act and for matters connected thereto.
Is there a seconder? It is ordered that the bill be brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to repeal and replace the Financial Transactions Reporting Act and for matters connected thereto. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will rise. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to repeal and replace the Financial Transaction Reporting Act and for matters connected thereto.
For the first reading of bills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Travelers Currency Declaration Act.
Second. Order that the bill be brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. Travelers Currency Declaration Amendment Bill 2017. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will rise. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Travelers Currency Declaration Act.
For the first reading of bills, Chair recognizes the member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to withdraw the following bills, which we will debate as a compendium, and substitute them with new bills. And I understand we've had agreement from the side opposite to effect that. Mr. Speaker, sorry, two bills on the regulations. So it's the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Amendment Bill 2017, the International Tax Corporation Amendment Bill 2017, and the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Amendment Regulations 2017.
Just confirmation from side opposite. Is an agreement? Thank you. Order that the bills be brought up.
Do I read this now? Do I lay this now? Do I lay this now? It's a regulation. I mean, I just leave it. You can lay it now. Do it now.
Order that the new bills be placed on the table.
Yes.
For the first reading of bills. Good none.
Mr. Speaker.
Second reading and committal of bills. Chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, once again, it is my pleasure and honor to rise on behalf of the good people of East Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, issued its Council's conclusions on the EU's list of non-cooperative jurisdictions for tax purposes, the so-called blacklist. Notably on the list were several Caribbean countries, including Barbados, Grenada, St. Lucia, Trinidad and Tobago, along with Panama and others. In omitting the Bahamas, the OECD expressed its sympathy and support to the jurisdictions in the Caribbean region that were severely struck by devastating storms in September of 2017, causing casualties and major damage to key infrastructure, and holds the view that the screening process should be put on hold for these jurisdictions: Anguilla, Antigua, and Barbuda, the Bahamas, British Virgin Islands, Dominica, St. Kitts, Nevis, Turks and Caicos, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Nevertheless, the Code of Conduct Group should, by February 2018, pursue further contacts with these jurisdictions with the view to resolving these concerns by the end of 2018. In our case, Mr. Speaker, reviewing the concerns listed by the OECD with respect to the non-cooperative countries listed, we are heartened by the fact that our proactive actions and positive discussions with the OECD further qualifies us as a cooperative jurisdiction and deserving of our status irrespective of hurricanes or disruptions. Our commitment to a well-regulated and transparent jurisdiction will be further communicated next week when the Minister of Financial Services and I travel to Europe to sign the Multilateral Competent Authority Agreement, which I will speak about a little bit later. Mr. Speaker, the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Amendment Bill 2017, the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Amendment Regulations 2017, and the International Tax Cooperation Amendment Bill 2017, which we are debating as a compendium, have been widely circulated and consultations received from industry stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, these bills seek to satisfy requirements for the Bahamas to be eligible to be invited to ratify the Multilateral Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters, to provide for full implementation of the Common Reporting Standards, enhance the legal framework to allow for the automatic exchange of financial account information by September 2018, and to prevent the Bahamas from being placed on the European Union's list of non-cooperative jurisdictions for tax purposes. The Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Amendment Bill 2017 amends certain provisions of the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act 2017. The Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act was published in the Official Gazette of the Bahamas on 29 December 2016, and the Act came into force on the 1st of January 2017. Mr. Speaker, before going into the substantive changes of the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Amendment Bill 2017, I would like to give members of the House a brief insight into the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act 2017. The Automatic Exchange of Information Act makes provisions for the Bahamas Competent Authority to automatically exchange financial account information with a competent authority in a partner country in respect to citizens of that country. In addition, the Act provides for the implementation of the Common Reporting Standards and due diligence for financial account information in tax matters. The Common Reporting Standard and due diligence procedures were devised and approved by the OECD on the 1st of July 2014. The OECD, established by the OECD Convention on 14 December 1960, is a standard-setting body consisting of a group of member countries concerned with issues of market economies. The Bahamas has undertaken to implement the OECD Global Forum new international standards known as the Common Reporting Standards for the automatic exchange of financial account information in tax matters by September of 2018. Full implementation of the Common Reporting Standards requires participating jurisdictions to translate the reporting and due diligence requirements into domestic law, select a legal basis for the exchange of financial account information, have administrative and IT infrastructure in place to collect and exchange information under the standards, as well as have the requisite confidentiality and data safeguards. Mr. Speaker, at first the Bahamas opted to exchange information using the OECD's Global Forum bilateral route. At that time, there were other participating jurisdictions using this same bilateral route. But the requirement was that you, as the country selecting the bilateral route, would have negotiated a minimum of 60 bilateral agreements for the automatic exchange of information. Unfortunately, up to the end of May, we had only negotiated 2. And so we were obviously far behind in meeting that commitment. Other jurisdictions, Mr. Speaker, choose to exchange via the Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters, or what we call the MAC, as amended by the 2010 protocol. Following the pressing concerns of the OECD regarding the Bahamas' ability to successfully implement the standards by 2018, in addition to the continued negative international press on the same, the Bahamas gave consideration to signing the MAC. In March 2017, after approximately 96 jurisdictions signed the MAC, the Bahamas was viewed as the last country left to commit to signing the MAC, and only Hong Kong, China, and Macau are now currently not using the MAC, but have committed to exploring this route. In May 2017, the Bahamas expressed its intention to the OECD Secretary General to sign on to this convention. Mr. Speaker, the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Amendment Bill 2017 makes provisions for the Bahamas in the very near future, in fact, next week, to sign on to the Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters, as amended by the 2010 protocol. Mr. Speaker, I will now go through the changes to the bill, to the Act, which are contained in the bill before us. Clause 3 repeals and replaces Section 3 of the Principal Act to clarify and expand the purposes of the Act vis-a-vis the Bahamas' commitment to joining the Convention, putting in place the requisite legal framework for CRS implementation, adopting the multilateral approach to the automatic exchange of information, tax information, and becoming a signatory to the multilateral convention agreement. Clause 4 repeals and replaces Section 5 of the Principal Act to clarify and limit the due diligence obligations of reporting financial institutions in their identification of reportable accounts. For purposes of the AEOI, Automatic Exchange of Tax Information, AEOI, due diligence obligations as expounded in the CRS are paramount. Clause 6 inserts new Section 6A into the Principal Act to impose on account holders and controlling persons an obligation to provide a true and accurate self-certification when requested or required to do so by a reporting financial institution under this Act. Clause 8 repeals and replaces Section 9 of the Principal Act to expand and clarify the functions of the competent authority. And in this case, the competent authority is the Ministry of Finance. Clause 10 inserts a new Section 10A into the Principal Act to provide for an expanded legislative framework that enables the issuance of CRS rules and guidelines by the competent authority. Clause 12 amends Section 15 of the Principal Act to expand the application of this section by replacing reportable financial institutions with the broader term persons. Clause 13 inserts a new Section 15A and 15B into the Principal Act to strengthen compliance and enforcement by giving the competent authority the ability to issue a compliance notice and have ability within its discretion to issue after 30 days an administrative penalty upon any person for failure to comply with the notice and to create offenses and penalties in relation to specific breaches of the Act. Mr. Speaker, to ensure consistency within our tax information exchange regime, the administrative office offenses and penalties have been benchmarked against our competitor jurisdictions, the Cayman Islands, as they have also included penalties for breaches of their substantive act implementing the Common Reporting Standard. Mr. Speaker, notably absent from the Cayman Islands CRS legislation is an imprisonment component, thus our reasoning for not including the same within this bill. Further, Mr. Speaker, the bill also seeks to make provisions for the minister to specifically make regulations to give effect to tax conventions accepted by the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And if I don't have it before me, but if I remember correctly, the fines that are outlined in the Act with respect to breaches is $300,000, up to $300,000. And for unintentional omissions, I think it's $1,000. So you can see that we are very serious about the enforcement of these regulations, because they do carry significant penalties. Clause 14 amends Section 16 of the Principal Act to expand the specific regulatory making powers of the minister to include inter alia the power of the minister to create new offenses under the regulations and to give effect to new treaty arrangements for the automatic exchange of information under CRS. Mr. Speaker, I've laid the regulations for the automatic exchange of information, which came into effect March 2017 and are now being amended today. The amendment of Regulation 2 of the principal regulations are amended to remove the words applicable and effective dates. And this is a significant change in approach as the terms were to negotiate the date of exchange that followed the execution date of the agreement. Mr. Speaker, the amendment provides actual dates for the transmission of information by different types of accounts, clarity and definition for key terms found in the Common Reporting Standard, and further amendments include deletions of sections, renumbering, and correction of clerical errors. Mr. Speaker, the International Tax Cooperation Amendment Bill seeks to amend provisions of the International Tax Cooperation Act of 2010. The International Tax Cooperation Act 2010 came into force on the first day of July 2010. The Act has been amended from time to time, whereby the amendments came into effect on the 12th of February 2012 and 25th of September 2013, respectively. Mr. Speaker, the Principal Act is being amended to make provisions for a protocol to amend tax information exchange agreements to facilitate automatic exchange of financial account information for tax purposes and to strengthen confidentiality and enforcement of providing financial information under this Act. The insertion of Section 9A and 9B into the Principal Act provides that existing tax information exchange agreements, or TIAs, may be amended by way of protocol to allow for the automatic exchange of financial account information for tax purposes. The TIAs are amended by the adoption of the articles of the protocol, which is introduced in the second schedule. Further, this bill seeks to provide that where a TIA has been amended, the provisions of the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act, number 37 of 2016, shall apply. Mr. Speaker, the new sections 11A and 11B are inserted to empower the competent authority to issue written notices directing reporting financial institutions to comply with the Act within a specific period and on specific conditions. The competent authority may impose an administrative penalty if the person or institution named in the notice fails to comply. It is the intention for these enforcement provisions to operate as an effective deterrent to non-compliance with requests made under the Principal Act. Mr. Speaker, it seems we are constantly having to amend our laws to adapt to the ever-changing international demand for cooperation and transparency in tax matters. However, for those who may say we ought not to go any further in complying with the OECD demands, I want to quote a few points that the Council, the OECD's Council, noted in its recent conclusion. And this is important, Mr. Speaker, because for the average man, these bills are confusing and they don't really see how they relate to them. But when I read these quotes, direct quotes from the conclusion, I hope persons can understand why it is so important to do what it is that we're doing today. Because it does have, I was going to use the word trickle down, but that seems like a bad word these days. But it is going to have cause and effect. It will have an effect, or it can have an effect, on the daily lives of the ordinary person. So the Council said in its conclusions, the Council is convinced that in such a case, the tax legislation, and they're talking about the non-cooperative countries, that in such a case, the tax legislation, policies, and administrative practices of these jurisdictions result or may result in a loss of tax revenue for member states, and that such jurisdictions should therefore be strongly encouraged to make the changes necessary to remedy the situation. So they're saying to their own members that these non-cooperative jurisdictions may be causing a reduction in our own tax revenue, and we have to do something. We have to act. And you'll see what they say later on. The Council reiterates that it is of crucial importance to provide efficient protection mechanisms to fight against the erosion of member states' tax base through tax fraud, evasion, and avoidance. So they're making it clear that this automatic exchange of information is no longer really about anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing so much, but is now moving on to combating the erosion of OECD member states' tax base, becoming economic, Mr. Speaker. And that is a lot more difficult for us. The Council takes the view, as set out in Annex 3 of their conclusion, that effective and proportionate defensive measures, they're acting now, in both non-tax and tax areas, could be applied by the EU and member states vis-a-vis the non-cooperative jurisdictions as long as they are part of such list. So they're now urging their members to take defensive measures against or what they term as non-cooperative states. And we're talking about economic measures. The Council recommends that member states take certain coordinated defensive measures in the tax area as set out in Annex 3, here too. Again, that's attached to the conclusion. In accordance with their national law and in accordance with the obligations under EU and international law. The Council calls upon the Code of Conduct Group to continue exploring further coordinated measures in tax areas and invite the member states to inform the Code of Conduct Group on whether and how they apply defensive measures vis-a-vis the non-cooperative jurisdictions as long as they are part of the list. The Council invites the EU institution and member states, as appropriate, to take the EU list of non-cooperative jurisdictions for tax purposes into account in foreign policy, economic relations, and development cooperation with respect to third countries, to strive for a comprehensive approach as regards to the issues of compliance with the criteria without prejudice to the respective spheres of competence of the member states and of the Union as resulting from the treaties.
What year was that? What's the date on that?
Yesterday. Yes. The Council believes that the list of non-cooperative jurisdictions and the defensive measures, when applicable, will have the effect of sending a strong signal to the jurisdictions concerned, thus encouraging a positive change leading to the removal of jurisdictions from the list. And that's the end of my quoting from their report. Mr. Speaker, you can see from that list of quotes that I just read that the OECD and its member states are deadly serious about the actions they intend to take when they talk about defensive measures. And, you know, I think what is paramount in this is when they talk about defensive measures to include foreign policy, economics, and relations with respect to treaties. Mr. Speaker, obviously, as a jurisdiction that derives a significant portion of its economic GDP from financial services, from an industry that employs a significant amount of our middle class and provides high salaries and profitable careers for our people, we as a jurisdiction have to do everything that we possibly can to ensure that we protect our reputation and that we signal and act in a proactive manner to ensure that we remain clear of any kind of blacklisting, gray listing, or any other kind of listing of non-cooperative, non-cooperation listings. And Mr. Speaker, the OECD and its member states are telling us that failure to comply with what they consider best practices and transparency comes with consequences. As an open economy, those consequences can be significant for us outside of financial services. For instance, a large part of our economy is dependent upon foreign direct investment. It's dependent on our ability to earn foreign currency in order to facilitate cross-border trade, to import and to pay for the food that we consume and other durable goods that we utilize in our everyday living. Oil, gas, everything that we consume, or most of what we consume locally, we need foreign currency in order to be able to trade. Part of the defensive measures that they talk about is the whole issue of corresponding banking relationships and the de-risking threat that exists particularly in this region. Unfortunately, the Bahamian dollar is not a tradable currency. And so in order to affect the transactions we need to do internationally, in order to be able to pay foreign vendors, we have to be able to do business through our corresponding banking relationships. And so again, you can see that our need to comply and our need to be as proactive and transparent as possible and as our law permits is vitally important, not only to the financial services industry, but to each and every citizen and resident in this Bahamas. And so, Mr. Speaker, the reality is that while we certainly value our sovereignty and our ability to determine the tax regime that we want to employ, we have to be ever mindful of the changing environment. And we have to be mindful that as an open economy, dependent on cross-border trade, that we have to bear in mind the actions of those countries that we trade with and be prepared to discuss up front, to be proactive with, and to negotiate from a position of strength the most favorable terms that we can to negotiate what we feel is best practice, but in the end, to be seen as being partners in this entire effort and to be seen as being transparent in that process and cooperative. And so, Mr. Speaker, I submit these 3 bills for approval today, recognizing and commending to the House their immediate passage, which will give me, as the Minister of Finance, the authority to sign on to the multilateral convention next week, and to engage with the OECD once again in a proactive manner to help them to understand our circumstances and our vulnerabilities such that we help shape policy with respect to how these conventions ought to work and how relations between these developed, I wanted to use the word dominant, but I don't know if I want to use that word per se, but these major countries view us and interact with us. And so, Mr. Speaker, thank you for your time. And I want to say again that I know for the average man out there that this is complicated, that you don't necessarily understand why this is important and how this relates to you, because you're trying to make your hustle every day, and this has nothing to do with you. But I want to encourage you to appreciate on its basic level that this relates to the fact that you want to be able to earn foreign currency, that you want to be able to import food, furnitures, oil, whatever the items that you use in your daily lives freely and consistently, without obstruction, without having to resort to black markets and other nefarious routes in order to pay for those goods. This really is about all of us, not just the financial services industry. This is about all of us and our need to ensure that we protect our financial institutions, that we protect our ability and our corresponding relationships. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the honorable member for North Abaco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. North Abaco rises to second this compendium of bills which will seek to facilitate the financial industry sector in our country and doing business in the way that we have become accustomed as a jurisdiction which rests among the leaders in this arena, in this region. But indulge me, Mr. Speaker, to please, before I begin, in earnest, to extend condolences to the family of Sean Fluff Mitchell, who died violently on Saturday night in a car accident in my constituency in Dundas Town, and to admonish young men as they traverse the streets of this country, because we also had some deaths in New Providence, which were by nature vehicular, to exercise caution and to understand that speed indeed kills. I'd also like to extend condolences to the family of Liberty Cornish, George Cornish, my cousin, in Dundas Town. He and his wife, they lost their daughter for a long struggle. But, Mr. Speaker, we lost a matriarch in the person of Millie McIntosh from Foxtown, and I extend condolences to her family on behalf of me and my family, and to say that even though I travel tomorrow on the country's business, I will do my endeavor best to return to attend that funeral on Sunday in Foxtown. Mr. Speaker, it goes without saying that the financial services sector constitutes an extremely important segment of the Bahamian economy. The sector that is one that is inherently transnational by nature and also exceptionally competitive. In order for us to continue to participate in the sector at the desired level, Bahamas must remain responsive, responsible, and committed to adhering to international best practices that lend to the viability and success of the financial institutions that operate within its borders. Now, clients who rely on the services that such institutes provide, and our citizens that rely on this dynamic industry for continued economic viability and sustenance. In this vein, successive governments of this country have always sought to do their part to ensure that the industry maintains a posture conducive to its good standing. In turn, industry partners have also proven themselves to be nimble and responsive to global changes, always mindful of the need to adhere to international standards with respect to compliance, international cooperation, and transparency. You know, Mr. Speaker, this is complemented by the fact that the Bahamas is not only somewhere that offers bespoke private wealth management, but it is also a beautiful country in which to live and to work. And so the need to be responsible international financial center is not seen as a heavy burden to those engaged in the financial services in this country, but rather it is embraced as a sacred pact with the many stakeholders inclusive of the government, the clients and the professionals who work in the sector have come to rely on and to recognize the importance of the financial services industry to the Bahamian economy over all these years. Mr. Speaker, the financial services sector underpins the Bahamian middle class. This government, recognizing this fact, is committed to doing all that is required to strengthen the sector, enhance its global brand, and reposition it for long-term growth and sustainability. The bills before us today evidences the commitment of the government to displace any perception to the contrary. That is precisely why we have a long track record in the international community for being committed to this ideal and idea of compliance. the strong regulatory regime that has to date come now to characterize the financial services sector in this country ensures the integrity of the Bahamas as an international financial center, and that integrity is always maintained. Mr. Speaker, we are all aware that we live in a world where there will always be a need to take steps to protect and enhance the jurisdictional brand of this country if our financial services sector is to grow and to thrive in an emotive environment such as become the financial industry. Just yesterday, as alluded to by East Grand Bahama and our Minister of Finance, just yesterday the European Union issued a blacklist comprising some 17 countries deemed not to be cooperating in matters relative to taxes. 4 of these are CARICOM states, and they are inclusive of Barbados, Grenada, St. Lucia, and Trinidad and Tobago. Accordingly, countries, Mr. Speaker, that are blacklisted could lose access to EU fundings. Even though we were not mentioned on that list, and we empathize with our Caribbean sister states that were, we are acutely reminded of the constant and persistent risk to our jurisdictional brand. And as such, like Bahamian governments that preceded us, we are determined to continue to demonstrate this country's resolute commitment to the international cooperation on tax matters specifically, and to industry best practices and standards generally. What we do here today, Mr. Speaker, continues to signal to the international community that the Bahamas is committed to maintaining international standards and best practices. You know, Mr. Speaker, I believe personally that it bears repeating that as a sovereign nation for more than 40 years, successive governments of this country have consistently demonstrated our commitment to international best practices and cooperation in the administration of justice, international tax transparency, anti-money laundering, and the countering of financial terrorism initiatives. Financial services, Mr. Speaker, is not and cannot be political. Financial services is far too important to the economy of this country, as it employs many of the skilled and highly talented professionals within our country. There's no room for politics when we deal with financial services. There's no room for it. International cooperation facilitated by collaboration between my ministry and the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Financial Services is a priority for me as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. My ministry is committed to monitoring the developments in the context of international affairs to ensure that we take policy positions that support the sustainability of the sector. Mr. Speaker, as Minister of Foreign Affairs, maintaining the integrity of this jurisdiction is paramount to my ministry, because when we have a strong, impenetrable financial service sector which is positioned to detect those of nefarious or criminal intent, we enable a more secure Bahamas. Therefore, we must have strong laws that mitigate against money laundering, terrorist financing, and any other untoward financial transaction which might emerge. To do so, we must have tax transparency by taking steps to enhance cooperation. You know, in order, Mr. Speaker, to meet international standards for transparency and tax cooperation, the Bahamas has entered into more than 33 tax information exchange agreements, or TIAs. On the 3rd of November 2014, the Bahamas and the U.S. signed the agreement to improve international tax compliance and to implement FATCA based on the Model 1 Intergovernmental Agreement, or IGA. The agreement is an international instrument for the exchange of information for tax purposes between our countries. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas is committed to effectively implementing automatic exchange of information and common reporting standards, not just because it benefits our nation, but also because it inures to the benefit and safety of our neighbors. To do so speaks to our commitment to be a responsible member of the international community and to participate as states ought to in securing and protecting the interest of each other. The Common Reporting Standard, which was developed in response to the G20 request and approved by OECD Council on the 15th of July 2014, requires countries to obtain information from their financial institutions and to automatically exchange that information with other jurisdictions on an annual basis. Thus, in 2014, the Bahamas committed to the process and commenced positioning itself toward compliance. And so fast forward, Mr. Speaker, to the 29th of May of this year, very early in our term, our government formally indicated to OECD countries its interest in acceding to the multilateral Convention for Mutual Assistance in Tax Matters. Consultations with OECD, leading financial institutions, representative organizations in the private sector commenced several years ago, Mr. Speaker, with the intent of implementing the Common Reporting Standard for automatic exchange of information. And it was determined that it was in the best interest of the jurisdiction to adopt the multilateral approach. These bills now before this honorable House will give effect to this effort. It is, Mr. Speaker, the culmination of much collaboration with the private sector and our international counterparts. International cooperation is critical to the future of the financial services sector of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, protocols to existing tiers to allow for the automatic exchange of information under the Common Reporting Standard have been signed with several countries. And so what we do here today will only improve our ability to participate aggressively and more adequately in this financial service sector. I want to skip through some of this because the member for East Grand Bahama really did it justice and left very little meat on the bone. And so I'm going to skip through some of this, Mr. Speaker, in order to expedite my time here. And so now the bills before us. Now, to specifically address the provisions of the bills before us, the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Amendment Bill seeks to amend the automatic exchange. We've said that already. And the bill's passage will enable the Bahamas to become a party to the Multilateral Convention and evidence the Bahamas' adoption of the multilateral approach to the implementation of CRS, an automatic exchange of financial account information. Now, upon the Bahamas becoming a party to the convention and having already become a signatory to the Multilateral Competent Authority Agreement, which we anticipate will take place very shortly, the final phases of the implementation of the AEOI between competent authorities will be able to take place. And so I'm not going to read through these amendments, the clauses. I'm going to go fast forward here, if you indulge me. And so, Mr. Speaker, through collaboration with industry partners and comparing with comparable jurisdictions in the international financial community, we determined certain penalties that should be existent in our regulations and in the bill. And further, the draft bill enables the minister to make regulations to give effect to tax conventions and to international agreements, as he indicated while on his feet. Very briefly, Mr. Speaker, the regulations will also provide for the necessary guidance for the financial institutions to ready themselves for the 2018 reporting process. Mr. Speaker, as indicated by East Grand Bahama, as I am wont to say on this occasion, the Principal Act governs international tax cooperation. The amendments are required to incorporate the automatic exchange of information under this existing framework. The Principal Act is being amended to provide for a protocol to amend existing tax information exchange agreements, allowing for automatic exchange of financial accounts information for tax purposes and to strengthen confidentiality requirements and enforcement measures under this Act. Confidentiality, Mr. Speaker, is very important in the financial services industry. And so the bill also seeks to facilitate the insertion of new provisions on confidentiality with respect to requests for information that will be supplied to the competent authority. Now, more specifically, Mr. Speaker, to my ministry, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs supports any international effort that will seek to cause this country to be compliant with international best standards. And as indicated earlier, my ministry will continue to work hand in glove with all of the relevant agencies to facilitate the effective implementation of CRS to meet our 2018 commitment. Currently, the Bahamas awaits a response from OECD with respect to its request to be invited to sign the multilateral convention. Mr. Speaker, my colleague ministers of Finance and Trade and Investment will travel to San Marino very shortly to sign a multilateral competent authority agreement that will set the ground rules for the process of exchange between the Bahamas and other countries. My ministry supports this effort and the overarching objective of positioning the financial services sector for long-term growth and sustainability. Financial services is that important to our economy, and we will do all in our power to raise the international profile of this jurisdiction and to protect our reputation as a viable and competent jurisdiction in which to conduct the business of financial services. And so, Mr. Speaker, with those few short words, North Abaco seconds this compendium of bills before you, and I thank you for your time.
It has been moved and seconded that the compendium of bills with the principal bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act to strengthen compliance and enforcement with respect to common reporting standard. As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for South and Central Andros and Mangrove Key.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that is a mouthful, but I'm glad you said Mangrove Key because I must hasten my comments today because I would be in Mangrove Key this afternoon for their annual Christmas party and events there. And tomorrow I'll be in the Fresh Creek community for their annual event in the Fresh Creek community. And on Saturday, with your leave, sir, if I may use your King Air, I would need to be here for the Junior Junction events in Nassau and leave to attend the Christmas Gala at Menentia Park in Deep Creek in South Andros. And then on Sunday, I will go to my birth settlement of Smiths Hill, to the historic Mount Olive Baptist Church of the Reverend Arlene Smith and others for her pastoral anniversary. A very busy time during this Yuletide season for one hometown boy. But my friends would not want to stay in Bethlehem, or in the manger, should I say. They would want to stay in the fallacious environment of New Providence in the hotels in their big bedroom. So in the new year, with the opening of all our hotels, we will be just okay. Mr. Speaker, I stand to be very brief because I don't have the notes of the member for Exuma and the Ragged Islands, to make a very brief contribution to the Automatic Exchange Information, Financial Account Information Amendment Bill 2017 and to the International Tax Cooperation Bill 2017. Mr. Speaker, I must note at the outset that I noted the fact that the member for East Grand Bahama, as Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, noted the fact that the OECD have become a bit empathetic and understand the challenges that we in this part of the world would have faced due to the ravages of recent hurricanes. That is a very good sign, Mr. Speaker, for these organizations, because I would have had a chance to have been a part of various meetings in Strasbourg and also in Brussels, and to observe what would have taken place in our Commonwealth through the various agencies and entities and treaties being signed in the various forums. And the comments coming from what we call the more dominant or the first world countries, many instances have left us as developed and developing territories many times very challenged, and should I say almost in a state of concern. But this is a very good sign that they understand that we are challenged in this part of the world, but we also want to support at the outset this compendium of bills that has been presented by the government here this morning. This legislation encompasses the amendments to the prior legislation that the PLP passed to address the automatic exchange of financial information under the Common Reporting Standard, Mr. Speaker. These amendments are a result of a new commitment to a multilateral approach rather than the bilateral approach of exchanging of information that some have adopted and that we in the former administration would have adopted in the main. The change was contemplated and agreed to by the Progressive Liberal Party, but as announced by this new government, they've decided to go along, and that's where the world is heading today in the world of financial services, Mr. Speaker. The change is a position that has had the same as a result of the tactics, many have even called the strong arming tactics of the OECD, that has forced not only our hands, but also many other territories and jurisdictions in the world. The current international environment leads to us having to pass legislative amendments and also regulations that are appropriate here today. The OECD has weighed in and suggested some amendments, and I too, on this side, along with our side, support the efforts of the present administration in this regard. I want to admonish the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Financial Services, the member for East, the Grand Bahama, and the member for St. Anne's, respectively, as they travel to that historic and cobblestone community of San Marino next week to represent our country, that we understand the exigency of the OECD, and as they travel to the EU territories generally, that we are not blacklisted as not being blacklisted is a very good sign for our country. Mr. Speaker, it's a bad feeling when you travel the world and persons are mentioning you among non-cooperative countries, being grey-listed. Leaves a bad taste in the mouth as a proud Bahamian. And I must say that we respect their efforts, and I gave a little comment across the floor, and I want to commend the member for East Grand Bahama. I know he works real hard. And I think this is a very good sign. But I know, as we know, the fact that the financial services sector in the Bahamas today is going to be facing a number of challenges, because the abolishment of the financial privacy in the Bahamas has virtually been lost. And therefore, the value of proposition in the financial services is now being challenged. So the new frontier is to attract ultra-high net worth clients who would come and move in and set up what we call family offices and also headquarters in the Bahamas. But I would have loved to say in the same way we would have moved very quickly and expeditiously with the commercial enterprise bill, that we could have done the same in the financial services sector. And I say this in a very noted way. I take this very seriously, because this is the area that employs a lot of Bahamians who are in this middle, what we call the middle income and the higher echelons of our society, who today being challenged and are very afraid of what's going to happen and what's going to face them in the new year. And so, therefore, with all the overhauls and the inefficiencies that have come and challenges that are faced and are very stark in the financial services sector, I would have hoped also, as we have seen, compendium of bills and other things coming for the commercial enterprise, that we can also would have been more assertive on both sides in moving quickly in the financial services sector and moving in a fast-track way to impact and attract a new level of clientele to our society. The ease of doing business in our country makes us a less than competitive territory. And this new frontier and our search for a new value proposition as a jurisdiction is important. Fast fundamental reform is needed in the Bahamas. Decentralized approval for investment and business is required. Our marketing efforts has been lacking over the years, Mr. Speaker. There's a need to be more. There's a need for mandatory re-education of our workforce in the financial services sector. Banking is going to go through a serious contraction in the years to come, according to most reports. We're going to have to do more as a service provider economy, more activities that are related to banking, services that are related to banking are going to be relegated to the sidelines, and financial services would now have to adjust with a new set of skill sets. Institutes such as the Bahamas Institute for Financial Services need to be financially funded and given greater subventions by our government, as they, over the next 3 years, according to my sources, would have to go through what we call a whole new retooling and re-educational process to be fitted for the new developments in the financial services sector in the years to come. We must move now, Mr. Speaker, and we must move quickly. We are seeing assets and clients leave jurisdiction in droves. We need to see a new value proposition like yesterday in the face of financial transparency and a full-force marketing campaign once this platform has been developed. The Bahamas Financial Services Board, once again, needs a 100% increase in its subvention if we are going to develop and we're going to tell our story to the world. We are in somewhat of a dire straits, but we can survive, Mr. Speaker. We can thrive, and we can come to the top once again. But we need innovation. We need to get ourselves rid of all the bureaucracy, and also government need to have some level of decentralization in this process. And approvals and reforming of skill sets is going to be pivotal. I note the fact that the member for East Grand Bahama noted the fact that there's an established fines protocol. Makes me feel good, because when things are said about the Bahamas that are not complimentary, me as a proud Bahamian, I feel it. And I know what it's like when I would have traveled the region, Latin America, and also the European bloc, and comments were made about the Bahamas. I become a little anxious and exercised by those comments being made about my country. But today, the Caribbean region, more than any other region in the world, now faces a threat that has severe implications for its economic viability. The issue of correspondent banking, Mr. Speaker, is a major one, and its termination. Correspondent bankings are essential to the global payment system, facilitating cross-border transactions, particularly for international trade, remittances, and foreign direct investments. Outside of setting up branches in foreign countries, which is very costly, a domestic respondent bank requires a correspondent bank in that country territory to act on its behalf. However, amidst concerns about money laundering and the financing of terrorism, several correspondent banks have been terminating or restricting business relationships with clients or categories of clients to avoid rather than manage the inherent risk of being in some of these territories. This action has been referred to as de-risking or debanking. It is a challenge that requires urgent and coordinated action on all fronts. A recently published IMF report or working paper further exposes the impact correspondent banking de-risking is having on Bahamas-based institutions and their clients, with wire transfer fees alone have increased by some 20% since 2012. Bahamian banks, Mr. Speaker, have increased fees for cross-border transactions by as much as 186% over the last 5 years due to growing pressure on their international ties. Mr. Speaker, this is a major challenge we are facing. The IMF paper warned that besides further depressing growth and jobs in the financial services industry, de-risking was also complicating the efforts to diversify the economy, with many institutions vulnerable to further reductions in the number of relationships that they hold with foreign correspondents. Mr. Speaker, many of our Bahamian contemporaries are this morning watching in the banks. I noted very quickly in my final few points of observation that the Bahamas has been warned that the decision by banks in Europe and the United States to end banking correspondence with financial institutions in the Caribbean could lead to further economic problems for the region. So therefore I noticed some things generally as a non-finance person. Comments by the Governor of the Central Bank of the Bahamas, Mr. John Roll. And I note the following. In the summer of 2015, the Central Bank obtained a survey of feedback from some 53 banks and trust companies on how they were being affected by these developments. And here are some of the highlights, Mr. Speaker, as we look at the implications of the of the International Tax Cooperation Bill today. In the summer of 2015, the Central Bank obtains, it says here, for example, impacts were felt mainly within standalone banks, locally and internationally. At least 6 banks had lost a relationship even though they were able to find replacements under heightened scrutiny and additional reporting requirements. 4 banks confirmed impacts on some aspect of their remittance program. Relationships were primarily terminated by U.S. and Canadian correspondent banks, and the most respondents operated with less than 3 correspondent banks generally in the region, and formal contingency planning around how to address the loss of a correspondent banking relationship were not widely in place. Bahamian banks, money services businesses, and other relevant private sector institutions should design a homogeneous mechanism as far as data privacy laws allow to share data that helps the Caribbean organizations generally in what we call knowing your customers. Alternative actions should be considered by banks considering a de-risking exercise. They should implement measures to mitigate risk rather than de-risking, it was noted. So therefore, it is important to note that we in the Bahamas have not done a very good job in the main, Mr. Speaker, as I would bring it home, because I always believe in politics as being local. I would not even try to follow all the contextual nuances that the member for East Grand Bahama would have gone through. But I got to bring this home since I'm going home this afternoon. We support e-payments and mobile money, which we could obtain, which will lead to some risk from the internal, external disruptions and everything else. Domestic e-payments and promote more non-cash transactions. But the fault has been in the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, with the financial services sector, that they never included, in my view, the wider expanse of the family island community and what they were doing in the financial service sector generally. Bahamians are over a certain age, especially over the age of 50 generally, still are afraid, or there's much trepidation about using a debit or even a credit card. And so therefore talking about e-payments and paying bills online becomes a very frightening exercise for a lot of Bahamians. So non-cash payments is a major challenge for our society. Here it is, in a sophisticated Bahamian society. I got to go down home, Mr. Speaker. Our banks have not, and financial agencies and trust companies have not done a good job in training and updating and moving our society along with them in the main. That's why the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance could say what he said this morning to many in our society. This may sound a little odd or not related to you, the contribution I'm making, but it is critical. And I smiled because Bahamians have come along when it comes to technology. The average person in our society today, no matter how old they are, can go on Facebook and they can use WhatsApp for the most part. But we left our people behind in the financial services sector, in my view, Mr. Speaker. That's my simple view. And so today, we are facing a challenge. I go to a community of Mangrove Key this afternoon. I go to South Andros on the weekend, and ATM machines have not been provided by these banks in these communities. When emergency occurs, persons cannot use the ATM machine or access money at night to have an emergency flight to take persons out of the Family Islands, even though the airports would now have light, as provided by the member, my good friend and colleague from the member for Angliston, who provided a lot of these facilities in our Family Islands. I must say, Mr. Speaker, and everyone who comes to equity must come with clean hands, and I come with clean hands. I want to thank today, although I didn't support gaming and what we call the numbers bill. I don't want to be technical. I didn't support the numbers bill. So therefore, I don't owe anything to my good friend but the flowers in Sabas. But during this Yuletide season when we're being grateful, and I see the house chaplain is still here, and he's a man of faith, and he understands where I come from. But I must also thank them, because had it not been for Sabas and flowers in these Family Islands, people in the Family Islands, although I did not support the bill to regularize them, people couldn't get monies and access money in the Family Islands. I'm an island boy. So for me, I can talk about this all day, and I support the Deputy Prime Minister and the member for for St. Anne's going to San Marino next week. I support it. But at the end of the day, there were some things that we have not done in our own society, Mr. Speaker, that we have fallen short in doing. And that challenges me this afternoon. So here we are today in the dilemma when our financial services sector maybe employs directly 4,000 or 5,000 people in our community, but the wider society has been left behind in a sophisticated, quote-unquote, Bahamian society. We are challenged. Family Island communities cannot get money on a day-to-day basis in these communities. And now these hard banks, what we call brick and mortars, are now leaving our Family Island communities. As a speaker today, my heart is heavy. I'm challenged for Family Island communities. I'm challenged for my hometown. So, Mr. Speaker, I would not want to change the context of what we are addressing here. This is a very serious matter. But I know the fact that in everything, my grandma always said to me, charity begins at home and ends abroad. So if we do not include our people in moving forward, we would have missed the mark. I think we need to go through a re-educational program at the grass level in our society, the same way we're going to have the incentive programs through the commercial enterprise bill. Find some funding out of the $5 million I heard the Prime Minister talked about just yesterday, where we can re-educate our people in our churches, in our lodge, in our various societies, and get our older people over the age of 50 who have all this trepidation about being in what I call the E-world of the 21st century, to change some mindsets. Because the stark reality is the world has changed, and has left lots of Bahamians behind. Bahamians today should not be going away for Christmas and carrying purse full of cash money and putting themselves at such a disadvantaged position of being robbed or people taking advantage of them. That's where we are today. And we have not done much. And also, the cost of doing business in our banks has been a big and a prohibitive issue in our society. Interest rates, ATM machines cost, depositing your money, cashing checks, all these issues that we must face. And I don't want to deviate from this bill today, but Mr. Speaker, these are issues that our people are very concerned about. So today, I leave, and I want to let the member for East Grand Bahama know that he has our support. Boy, it's a good feeling when we can stand together. The member for North Abago can talk before the member for Mangrove Free South and Central, and we can be on one page. So same accord. It makes us feel good in this society that we can collaborate and have our differences, but know when it's important for us to come together to do things for the building of a better society in the 21st century and beyond. So today, I want to see an improved financial services sector, one that we can all be proud of. And Mr. Speaker, not only on Bay Street, but also having those opportunities expanded to our family islands and across this great Commonwealth, so that we can also feel that there is also a level of reality, as you have the fiduciary responsibility to do so, that we also are part of this process, especially in our family island communities. Mr. Speaker, once again, on behalf of the people of Mangrove Key, South and Central Andros, and my leader in his absence, deputy in his absence, the member for Angleston will make our contribution. I want to say once again to our Deputy Prime Minister and the member for St. Anne's, I want to wish you the very best. And I also want to say to you that this is a very good effort that you're leading on behalf of our country. And we, too, on this side, are proud that the Bahamas has not been mentioned. It's gray-listed or blacklisted. This is a good day. We celebrate this day today, and we feel proud of it. And I hope that we can see many more achievements such as this. Because if we don't, 5 years comes very quickly. And oh, I long one day to be on that other side where I too will be able to make those comments. So I would want, as I leave, to take my leave, Mr. Speaker, to go and get on my flight, for members of the adoring press to note that we're not always negative towards government policies and initiatives on this side. And I am proud today to stand as leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition in business in this Parliament to support the bill. I'm much obliged, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member, I must say that with the abstract nature of this debate this morning, you were able to bring it home. And Honourable Member, you know, I received some phone calls, for the past several weeks, that indicate that the chair laughs a lot when the government is speaking, but it's very serious when the opposition is speaking. So I'm thanking you today for breaking that trend for me, so that that cannot be said again. As many?
Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Long Island.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the great and indomitable people of Long Island. Before more, and with your kind indulgence, I wish to briefly address a few matters in my constituency. Mr. Speaker, today I extend my sympathies and condolences to former MP, one of my campaign managers, and Bahamas Consul General in New York, Mr. Larry Cartwright, Mr. Delbert Cartwright Jr., Loxley, Mrs. Cartwright, the wife of the deceased, and all the children and wider family of Mr. Delbert Cartwright Sr. Mr. Cartwright was a gem. He was humorous in nature, cogent, and very coherent, even at the ripe old age of 95. I recall his riddles and jokes when I last visited him, and he was a good friend and schoolmate to my grandfather when they all attended the Buckley's all-age school. I also extend sympathies on his behalf. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to extend sympathies to one of my biggest supporters, Ms. Sherelle Cartwright and her family, including the husband of the deceased, Mr. Wendell Carroll, on the passing of their mom, Mrs. Maud Carroll. There have been several deaths in my constituency of late, Mr. Speaker. Given the same, I extend sympathies to Sue and Smacky Smith on the passing of their son, Labby. Further condolences are extended to the family of Mr. Lambert Plummer, Major, and of course to the family of the late Hilton Tynequest. Lastly, I wish to extend my condolences to the DeVoe family of Grain Castle in Wimsey by the Lutra on the passing of their son and brother Stephen. Mrs. Margie, the mother of the deceased, has always been most generous and welcoming of me, and so my condolences are extended to her, to Lise, Jermaine, and all the siblings, Woody, and all the relatives. Mr. Speaker, there's two other points with respect to my constituency I'd like to raise before addressing the bill. In recent weeks, a barge wrecked on the shorelines of Long Island. Among the other items that the barge carried, it carried 37,000 gallons of diesel, almost 200 poles, vehicles, wire, telephone substations, a crane, etc. Today, the barge has broken up along the shoreline. The diesel has spilled into the water. The vehicles and other items are in the water. The poles are floating in shipping lanes, and we have still not seen any real effort to remove the barge. And so I am calling upon the government to address this matter, as it has become a hazard to boaters and to the environment and an eyesore. So to the Minister of Transport, your assistance is urgently needed. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I also note here the need for urgent assistance for the parking house staff in Long Island. Such assistance has been privately requested on several occasions, and I do so here again. The staff are usually drenched after a downpour of rain. On sunny days, they could sit in the parking house and look up and have a clear view of the sun and the sky, given the state of the roof. The department head has no vehicle to inspect farms and fisheries, to carry out or to carry produce to the mailboat, and or to fulfill his other duties. The parking house does not even have boxes to pack produce in for shipment, with staff seeking boxes on a weekly basis from stores on the island. I call upon the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries to urgently intervene. Now to the matter at hand, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can truly appreciate the government's need to advance these bills. A compendium, which is a compendium of legislation that ensures that we meet our commitment to the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, expand upon the existing legal framework to enable better implementation of the common reporting standards, and reflect our adoption of a multilateral approach to the implementation of the CRS and the automatic exchange of financial account information. Indeed, I am pleased to note that the bill seeks to clarify due diligence obligations, undergird and bolster the confidentiality requirement, which seek to ensure optimal data protection and the use of information for specified purposes. Mr. Speaker, indeed, this might well be another positive evolution in the financial services regime. It heightens a need for a revised focus geared toward niche financial services products. Unquestionably, accountants and tax attorneys, etc., are presented with new and exciting opportunities. Mr. Speaker, I concur that it is within the country's best interest for the Bahamas to engage in bilateral implementation of automatic exchange of financial account information through mutual consent. However, notwithstanding the fact that the first reports must be filed in late 2018, we should in no way dilly-dally until 2018 to start automatic tax information exchange talks. We could easily begin CRS-related talks with a number of countries, and that is more than we currently have, particularly states such as those in the European Union that have already been deemed as having participating jurisdiction status. Whilst I support the government's thrust to do what it must to meet global standards and comply with the commitment to OECD, we must be careful to ensure that our financial services industry is not weakened and or undermined. As we adhere to our regulatory obligations, we must ensure that our interests are also front and center. The CRS has a large and ambitious scope. And while significant penalty and enforcement powers are available to the competent authority for offenses and non-compliance, when contrasted to the Cayman Island regime, the penalty pursuant to Section 15B2 of an administrative penalty not exceeding $300,000 for each contravention versus the Caymanian legislation, which sets a fine of KYD 50,000, seems somewhat excessive. Likewise, at Section 15B3, the bill purports to fine a person who fails to file with or deliver to the competent authority a document within the required period, levying an administrative penalty of $1,000 for every day from the date the document was required to be filed. Whilst I embrace enforcement, I find this section to also be rather excessive when contrasted to the equivalent Caymanian section, where the charge is 100 KYD dollars penalty for each violation. Indeed, we could also add, to bolster Section 15B, an amendment that, like the Caymanian legislation, speaks to the accrual of interest at a daily rate on all or part of an unpaid penalty. The rate could be the higher of 5% or the average consumer price index plus the inflation rate for the three most recent calendar years. That said, the legislation could also provide for financial institutions to also be allowed to close accounts or cease acting for clients after a fixed period, particularly those who don't provide information that that institution itself is under an obligation to gather and support. In a recent CRS workshop, it was discussed that the way the present legislation is written, the Bahamas would have 3 advantages in comparison to our major competitors. 1, we do not automatically accept any amendments to CRS. 2, we do not implement the commentary to CRS into our law and elevate it to law. And 3, we consider the United States as a participating jurisdiction. By amending the definition of the CRS and amending the first schedule to the regulations, we rid ourselves of these 3 advantages. Considering that the Bahamas' government should have the opportunity to review and agree to amendments rather than automatically implement them. We must also consider that the commentary is now being given the force of law. There's an obligation to implement the commentary. There's no obligation to implement the commentary. And by implementing it, we may well be going above and beyond what the CRS requires. As for the USA, being a participating jurisdiction, we were one of the last countries where this was allowed. And it is anticipated that the OECD would make us remove it. But insofar as possible, we ought to push back, as the United States is a major trading partner, and there would be a lot of business opportunities for the Bahamas if it is left in the first schedule. Other minor points are as follows. With respect to the bill, the repeal and the replacement of Section 5 of the Principal Act. Section 5, as it currently stands, speaks to the Bahamian anti-money laundering legislation as the standard for due diligence, as well as the CRS. In my view, this is correct and should stay as is. With respect to the regulations, item 2, that is the definition of reportable jurisdiction, this definition truly complicates matters, and it is unclear what the benefit or intention is. The previous definition was much clearer and straightforward. This either needs to be clarified or the original definition ought to remain. Mr. Speaker, as stated earlier, I appreciate the need for the Bahamas to avoid any breaches of its international commitments. Given the same, relative to the implementation of the common reporting standards by the government and financial institutions, how far are we with harmonizing our technical and information technology modalities, inclusive of the standard reporting format, and meeting the requirement to ensure the secure transmission of data? Whilst I am all for upgrades and innovative stylings to our financial services product, I am patently aware that the compliance burden for financial institutions and the government itself will be heightened. Mr. Speaker, how does the CRS compliance regime correlate with the United States' Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, FATCA, with respect to due diligence and reporting procedures? Notably, the United States has not signed on to the Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters. Given the Bahamas' recent efforts in tackling FATCA stipulations and its recent completion of the second reporting cycle, how do we reconcile the two reporting standards with this jurisdiction? Indeed, there are notable differences between FATCA and the CRS, namely, one, the lack of a requirement on the part of one to register a foreign tax agency. Two, the lack of a requirement to obtain a unique identifier known as a global intermediary identification number as required by FATCA. The fact that, unlike FATCA, the CRS does not impose punitive sanctions for non-compliance. The fact that in one case, client classification relies upon tax residency as opposed to the other, where nationality is the main classification. Mr. Speaker, I welcome self-certification, the self-certification aspect of this bill, given that without the same, persons with multiple addresses might well be taxable in several jurisdictions within a reporting period. Indeed, the due diligence requirements must, at all times, take into account local residents from other countries should allow financial institutions in the Bahamas to do due diligence and keep records on residents already in the country for reporting. Mr. Speaker, the future of the financial services industry in this country and across the globe will be impacted by these measures. Whilst I appreciate the need for the bills, outside pressure from international institutions such as the OECD can also be viewed as curbing our fiscal sovereignty by powerful countries, as a curbing of our fiscal sovereignty by powerful countries that are setting the rules for today's financial service sector. Tax competition among countries is not what it once was. The idea of a tax haven in today's restrictive climate is tantamount to a relic of the past, nearly comparable to the sighting of a unicorn. Mr. Speaker, whilst the bills emanating out of the OECD treaty seek to ensure conformity and greater reporting, they also represent this curbing and/or elimination of competition in financial services in developing countries such as ours. The notion that prospective sanctions, such as blacklisting by the OECD and EU countries and other penalties could befall countries that opt not to participate, is troubling. It also speaks to an opinion by some in the financial services sector that individual country rights might well be ignored, and countries in turn may be seen to be surrendering their banking and fiscal sovereignty. We must be careful and mindful not to entirely surrender the same. To apply sanctions such as blacklisting against jurisdictions that opt to exert its fiscal sovereignty would be nothing short of neo-colonialism. We must be very careful not to relinquish our autonomy, only to soon have our tax structure dictated to us by more powerful nations. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas is not a tax haven. As it stands, the Bahamas is already compliant with the Financial Action Task Force on money laundering and counterterrorism financing, and subject to various reviews. Currently, countries such as ours comply with FATF guidelines, more than even the United States itself, which in 2006 was found to not be in compliance with entity transparency and gatekeeper rules. Notably, given the United States' decision not to sign onto the CRS, that is perhaps likely due to states such as Delaware, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Colorado, and Arizona demonstrably not adhering to OECD rules and developing competitive tax regimes of their own. And so yes, we should find ourselves in compliance with the highest standards relative to money laundering, tax evasion, and counterterrorism financing. No question. But when is enough enough? As a country, we are presently obligated to adhere to the FATF's rules, to OECD's reporting standards, maintain other tax information exchange agreements and mutual legal assistance treaties, and to contend with the onset of FATCA and the stipulations thereto. The bar is indeed set high. However, given the above, and Caribbean countries, or CARICOM countries, and possibly others, must also demand that OECD member countries embrace and employ the same rules parlayed onto smaller nations. The goalposts on tax matters ought not to be persistently shifted. Further stringent action could lend to the absolute cannibalization of our financial services sector. Our country and others must work as a bloc to present a united front, as was evidenced by Caribbean countries, the Isle of Man, Jersey, Austria, Switzerland, and Luxembourg, in its pushback to the OECD's harmful tax competitive initiative nearly 2 decades ago. Mr. Speaker, indeed, whilst I understand the need to meet timeliness relative to the completion of the domestic legislative process, we are always to ensure that we are, and our interests are also front and center. And so, Mr. Speaker, I close by saying that I understand and appreciate the value of this bill. However, I do have some concerns as articulated. Mr. Speaker, I close by saying we look forward to beating up on all challenges at this weekend's Best of the Best regatta. So, Mr. Speaker, Long Island thanks you for your indulgence.
As many? The chair recognizes the honourable member for Angliston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the good people of Angliston, who I believe, contrary to what the member of East Grand Bahama indicates, no thank you, has a very clear appreciation of this industry to our national life and our economy. There are some technical nuances that even many of us here perhaps don't understand, but I think fundamentally we should not underestimate the level to which our people are engaged in what is happening in their own country and how things tick. Speaker, as the member for South Andros and Mangrove Key has indicated, we support the legislation that is being debated in this Parliament. And the member for East Grand Bahama, I think, laid out the case in terms of the pressures that we are facing. And I think the member for Long Island brought a balance to this debate, in terms of how we have to balance the challenges that we face in this arena. Speaker, more and more we are becoming aware that the Bahamas, like every other country, is positioned in a global environment. You see it with the World Trade Organization and what comes along with that in terms of movement of labor and the removal of protectionist standards, etc. And as a result of that, countries like the Bahamas, which is a small island developing state, a small population, you could say limited resources in terms of what is happening in the world, are particularly challenged in how it is that we can maintain our viability as a people. Not just, and it's a sovereignty issue, but it's more than that. It's about how we position ourselves in this global cultural reality. And that is why I think the points just raised are very critical for us to consider. Because while we understand that the European states or members of the OECD have a concern, and it's an understandable concern, that where they believe people are avoiding, evading taxes in their own, their citizens in their own countries, and that impacts their national life and their quality of life, that they would seek to protect that interest globally where those citizens are engaging in business in a global way. But in the same vein, however, we have to find a way for countries like the Bahamas to ensure that we are able to, in this dialogue, that it is not one-dimensional or one-sided, but that we are able, as small as we are, and with all of our limitations that we may be perceived as having in this global reality, that we are able to properly position our country in this cooperation. The cooperation cannot simply be we are cooperating and therefore we will not be blacklisted. The cooperation has to be at a level of mutuality where you have equal states of equal significance in terms of just ideally that in this cooperation there will come larger involvements. And so I would invite the government in this dialogue to not simply approach this dilemma we are facing as one in which we got to do this before we get blacklisted, but to see our involvement of cooperation in these respective states, protecting their national interests, protecting the tax base, protecting their quality of life, that we should not view ourselves as just being on the receiving end of a negative or brunt or force of these European states or any state, that we should position the Bahamas in a way in which we say in this cooperation, this is how we see the Bahamas should be viewed in our engagement with you. And it should be, and out of that should come positive, favorable dialogue, and not simply being against this and being against that, and being against, they can stop doing this with us and they can stop doing that with us. We have to find a way in which to position ourselves so that we are not simply on the lesser end of this, the balancing of these scales. And so we know that before the Bahamas has been blacklisted, that we have a history of that, and that it changed the landscape, our laws changed, and as a result, the whole ethos of the industry is continuously evolving and shifting. And I agree with the point made that in this type of environment, to remain viable and competitive, we will have to be creative, we will have to be intelligent, we will have to oversee the industry in a way in which the Bahamas is able to protect our niche involvement in financial services globally. And so I want to encourage the government to engage in that kind of thinking, and it may necessarily be out of the box, but it will be in a way in which we maintain our relevance, while at the same time moving along with the evolving standards. I mention at this point the Commercial Enterprises Bill because this is, I think that this is, I make this point in that context also. We have to be very careful that we do not throw out the baby with the bathwater. You want to invite foreign direct investment, you want to stimulate, you say, new niche economies, but when you do it in a way in which, in a wholesale way, in which you compromise the interests of our people, then we wonder about how this is being viewed. And so I position this in this debate also because I think that we have to be very careful that we do not, while we know we are a little tiny little place, that we have to ensure that we are a big voice for the people of this country and not one that comes as a victim or as a small sort of insignificant player, but as a sovereign state that has much to offer in this industry, one of the leading jurisdictions, and that pursuant to that, we would wish to be, our voices to be more significantly recognized. I know it seems like difficult, but it is not. It's how you negotiate. Negotiation is key. We have to stop believing that the Bahamas we have to capitulate and capitulate and capitulate to get lesser and lesser and lesser. We see it with our engagements with foreign direct investors in the touristic sector, etc. I don't believe in that. I think we should move away from that. I think we should negotiate, understanding we have a great country. We have our human resource is fantastic, and that we are an intelligent and skilled in that sector, in particular, the touristic sector, and that we have much to offer. So that we move away from this, you see it with the cruise ships and et cetera, we move away from this this continuous drain of giving to get back, which it does not appear in these days to be proportionate. So I say that to encourage the government when they go to San Marino or wherever it is, describe the cobblestone place, when you go there and you negotiate on our behalf, that you do so, as I say, not drag and slipper, but you go there in a way in which you uphold the dignity of our country. We understand the need, what they are seeking to achieve, and we empathize with that, because that inures to their own futuristic development. So we empathize, but we have to find ways in which to ensure that we do not act in a way in which it is against our own interests. We have to create a balance, and it may not be easy, but that's the task. That's what you have to achieve. And the member for Long Island, I made some interesting points, and he does raise a point I think we must be cognizant of. We have to be careful we don't go beyond the standard, and you create a greater burden on the sector. Because this happened with the blacklisting in 2001, I think it was, 2001, where we, in a panic, we brought these compendium bills. They say the Attorney General didn't even know where they came from. They came from Washington or somewhere. And that we, our lawyers in Washington, you know what the St. Anne's. So, but then, then in hindsight, we were saying, Lord, we went too far. Yeah. So I want to ensure that we have given an appropriate analysis. This is a difficult environment, and it requires skill. It requires technical analysis that allows the Bahamas to navigate the continuing challenges, the evolutionary movements of the standards, but in a way in which we remain compliant, but we remain competitive, and we continue to be viable. And as I said, it's not an easy task, but that's what's on the table, and you have to achieve it. So I want to encourage you with that. And as you move forward in your, I want to also to ask you in that regard to revisit the Commercial Enterprises Bill, to put in place protections for Bahamian labor, to raise the level of the investment, because the things I heard being discussed by the ministers about the bill is not in the bill, are not in the bill. About you only have to work a year and then you won't get a work permit. The bill doesn't say those things. And the Bahamian people are confused now because you're saying but amendments, and they're wondering, there are no amendments that say that I saw. And so I'm inviting them to revisit, in the interest of the Bahamian people, the provisions of that legislation to protect Bahamians in our own economy, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that would be basically what I think that is the sum total of what I have to say, Mr. Speaker. I want to urge the government to ensure that they bring about the appropriate scrutiny, analysis, approach, and negotiation that allows the excellence of the Bahamians in this particular sector to continue to be viable, competitive, and predominant, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, in that regard, we support the efforts made, but we would ask that that the government be very wary, that we do not simply accept in a wholesale manner what is being mandated, but that we do so in a way in which we are assured that we meet the standard, but we protect the interests of the sector in the best way possible, Mr. Speaker. I think that is, and of course, and then that includes issues of confidentiality and all those things, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, I end by simply saying, on behalf of people of Angleton, that when you go to San Marino, that you pursue equity for the Bahamian people in your negotiations. Yeah, I'll come. You did say cobblestones, right? That you negotiate for equity for our people. And as I said, we want to go there as equal citizens, yes, global citizens around the planet, and not as people who are looking for, fearful, etc. Because that is not the spirit of the Bahamian people. We are a great people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many? The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for St. Anne's.
I would like to commend the Honorable Member for Eggleston. For Eggleston for her comments. Because I think she set out what a lot of us may not understand about the art of governance. Having been there herself before, she can understand, and I know she's had those instances in the aviation business where she had her challenges when she was the minister there. One of the things that when the member for East Grand Bahama and I travel next week is to do exactly what the member for Eggleston said. Because above all, each and every one of us are about achieving the best for the Bahamas that we can achieve throughout the world in whatever we do. The member for East Grand Bahama laid out the historical background of where we came. There were comments, for instance, from Eggleston that maybe in the 2000 blacklisting, possibly we might have erred too far the other way, but putting it in the framework of those 2001 era, there was tremendous pressure on the Bahamas for us to do what we had to do. The government came out of a blacklisting there, and we've obviously not had a blacklisting again, because what we've done is shown an effort to move forward. So, member for East Grand Bahama mentioned that we'd only had, I think, 2 tiers before the change of administration, and we signed on to the multilateral approach. That was a way to show that we are now, and not necessarily playing catch-up, but we want to lead this debate. So when the DPM and I go to San Marino next week, the object of the exercise is to put the best front forward for the Bahamas so that we can negotiate for the second pillar of our country the best deal possible. And I think by doing these bills and by the House debating them today and passing them, hopefully passing this afternoon and moving them on to the Senate, is showing a great deal of political maturity in that we've got to the point where we recognize that there are some things we have to do for the industry at large that is non-political, because we have a tremendous number of people working in this industry in this country. And these bills have not just come here via Washington. They were actually debated and discussed at the DPM, the Attorney General, myself, along with industry leaders, some of the top QCs and members in the law firm, the Bahamas Financial Securities Board, and all of us have got together with numerous emails. I mean, if you could see our emails going backwards and forwards to the OECD, saying, can we do this? How about this? There has been a real, true negotiation between the OECD and the Bahamas to make sure we achieve what we need to achieve. The industry has got used, as the member for Long Island said, to FACTA, where they have had to get used to the reporting standards required by America. There is, Long Island, quite a number of areas in FACTA that aren't on CRS, and that's been an issue around the world. When I was in Singapore and Cartagena recently, those issues were discussed. Why is America not doing this, and why is Britain doing this? But in the overall scheme of things, the industry knows that there is no longer a way of hiding issues. We have to be fully transparent. The Bahamas as itself has to move from a tax haven to a low tax jurisdiction. I think that's something we all admit. We spent a long time as both governments with a well-known person in the industry going around saying level playing field, level playing field, level playing field. It didn't work. It is what it is. You've heard me mention in here, for instance, the state of Wyoming, I think Long Island mentioned it, is out there competing for offshore business the same way the Bahamas is, the same way Cayman, BVI, Grenada, Dominica was represented at the conference I went to in Singapore. So the world is going after that limited amount of high net worth and ultra high net worth money that is out there that needs to be managed. We're not talking about managing questionable money. There are legitimate reasons for estate planning, in some cases the fear of kidnapping in some countries, and security of your family members, older persons getting up in age and they want to make sure their families and their families' businesses are secure. So there's many reasons for using tax planning and wealth management vehicles around the world. There are a number of them there, and all of them are being subjected to the same set of reporting requirements. So I think what we're seeing here is not a relinquishing of sovereignty, because as the world moves on, the question of sovereignty is getting blurred in a lot of ways. I mean, we've passed, for instance, here a CARICOM, I think we've passed the CARICOM extradition order, which is, I just use that by way of an analogy, whereas if a person in Barbados creates an offense that's extraditable, we have a very easy way of extraditing from the Bahamas to the Caribbean. Have we given up our sovereignty? Not necessarily. What we've done here is made it easier to get persons who evade the law or are criminals in some countries prosecuted in other countries. I know that's a criminal issue, but when we talk about in the financial services industry, we have to make sure that when the money is being moved from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, it complies with international regulations. Because if we do have a hint of a blacklisting, we may lose a number of banks and trust companies that are here in the Bahamas. We look forward to next year and in the future to be growing this industry by bringing businesses like headquartering. Matter of fact, just recently in the National Executive Council, we've had a number of applications that have come forward in the last couple of weeks with regard to new businesses that are headquartering, whether it's bulk ship bunkering, other issues where people are looking favorably at the Bahamas. So I think it's a great point in time that we have stopped any downward movement. We are projecting our way forward. We're negotiating from a sense of strength so that we benefit all Bahamians. Because one of the things we have to be careful of is, as the world consolidates in the financial services industry, that we make sure those persons who have those jobs in that area secure their jobs and have a future for working in the Bahamas and creating jobs and opportunities and wealth for their family. So, Mr. Speaker, just in terms of in terms of wrapping up the debate in the compendium of bills, the member for East Grand Bahama and I look forward to going to San Marino and being able to face-to-face discuss, negotiate, and put the Bahamas' interest forward so the international community will see us, we'll have a chance to talk with them, and hopefully we'll be able to open the door for further negotiations which grow the industry and also shows that the Bahamas is not playing catch-up. We are in a position where we want to lead the world, or lead the CARICOM countries, or lead the smaller jurisdictions, to show that the Bahamas is fully transparent, fully cooperative, fully willing to do what is necessary to become a very secure, very transparent, very useful and beneficial tax jurisdiction. Don't forget, we are the top in the Caribbean now. Let's not fool ourselves. We surpass a lot of the Caribbean in terms of our transparency, our compliance, and everything else. No, it's not going to be easy. Going into 2018, the cost of compliance for banks and trust companies will be slightly higher, but that is happening around the world because that is the nature of, any of you in the compliance industry, that's the nature of compliance. So we look forward to the passing of these bills, but we also look forward to next year in doing some other issues, and you've heard it out in the public domain, about risk-based banking, so that a lot of the problems where small account holders in the Bahamas have difficulty opening and maintaining bank accounts will also be alleviated and be made easier. So at the same time we're doing things for the trust companies and the financial service section, we're also going to do other things for Bahamians so that we make sure they have a better quality of life, a better access to capital, a better access to business, and a better opportunity to make sure they better themselves and become productive citizens in our country. Mr. Speaker, with those few comments, I'd like to commend the compendium of bills that we have here today and move the second reading and passing of the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. It has been moved and seconded that the compendium of bills be read for a second time and committed, with the principal bill being a bill for an act to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act to strengthen compliance and enforcement with respect to the Common Reporting Standard. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. It's ordered that the bill be read for a second time.
A bill for an act to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Accounting Information Act to strengthen compliance and enforcement with respect to the Common Reporting Standard.
For the second reading and committal of bills.
There are none. No.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to move for the second reading of a bill for an act to amend the International Tax Corporation Act.
Second. It's been moved and seconded that the following bill be read and a second time and committed. A bill for an act to amend the International Tax Cooperation Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for a second time and committed.
A bill for an act to amend the International Tax Cooperation Act.
For the second reading and committal of bills.
Mr. Speaker, there are no further second readings, but if I may obtain a second, I would like to move that the business of the House to continue beyond 1 p.m. And we're going to move that the House to resolve itself into committee of the whole so that we can pass both of these bills. That way the House does not have to come back at 3. So I do now move that the House to continue beyond 1 p.m.
Is there a second? Committee of the whole House?
Mr. Speaker, I do now move that the House to resolve itself into a committee of the whole with the Deputy Speaker and the Chair.
Is there a second? Second. It has been moved and seconded that the House resolve itself into a committee of the whole House with the Deputy Speaker and Chairman of the Committee of the whole House in the chair. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The Deputy Speaker will now take the chair.
Committee of the whole. Yeah.
Automatic exchange of information.
One of them it isn't after, right? I know. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I do move that the long title of the bill for an automatic exchange of financial accounting information, Amendment Bill 2017, be agreed.
It's being moved and second that the long title of the bill be agreed. As many that are in favor will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The long title is agreed.
Mr. Chair, I do move that the short title be agreed.
Do we have a second? It's being moved and seconded that the short title be agreed. As many that are in favor will remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The short title is agreed.
Mr. Chairman, I do now move that Clause 2 and the amendment of section be agreed.
It's being moved and second that Clause 2 be agreed.
Third reading and passing of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I do now move for third reading and passing of a bill for the automatic exchange of financial accounting information amendment bill 2017.
Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a third time and pass. Where did my bill go to? A bill for an act to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act to strengthen compliance and enforcement with respect to the common reporting standards. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read a third time.
A bill for an act to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act to strengthen compliance and enforcement with respect to the common reporting standard.
Order that the bill now pass and the title thereof be declared to be the Automatic Exchange for Financial Accounting Information Amendment Bill 2017. Amendment Act 2017. Order that the for the third reading and passing of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I do now move for third reading and passing of an act, the International Tax Cooperation Amendment Bill 2017.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a third time and pass. International Tax Cooperation Amendment Act 2017.
A bill for an act to amend the International Tax Cooperation Act.
Order that the bill do now pass and the title thereof to be the International Tax Cooperation Amendment Act 2017. For the third reading and passing of bills.
Mr. Speaker, there are no further third readings.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Amendment Regulations 2017.
Yes. Order that the regulations be brought up. Order that the regulations do lie on the table. For the third reading and passing of bills.
There are none, Mr. Speaker.
Consideration of Senate amendments. Resolutions. Member statements. Yes, the chair recognizes The Honourable Member for Angleton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I just want to rise to sort of, I guess, raise an awareness. I saw a flyer circulating that the Prime Minister is having a town meeting this evening to deal with the much-touted initiative pre-election and now post-election, finally, of the redevelopment. It's tomorrow? Tomorrow. The redevelopment of inner city communities. I forget the way it's described, but it's intended to be a tax concession, tax-free zones in inner city communities, etc. Now, I noted that the town meeting tomorrow night relates to Centerville, Bain and Grantstown, and St. Barnabas. The only other constituency that's not included in that is Angleton, which happens to share a border with St. Barnabas. One side of 3rd Street is Angleton, the other side. So, I mean, basically the same community, and also part of the Grove, which is, you know, the boundaries have divided, but they're one community. And also, in the case of Centerville, one side of Wolf Road is Angleton, the other side is Centerville. So I'm sure there's a very good reason why that particular constituency has not been included. I'm sure there is no adverse implication that it is represented by the one Progressive Liberal Party member in New Providence has anything to do with that. I'm certain.
You must clear
but I think that it is critical because it is a public finance initiative. Yeah. It's not a personal thing. You're using the resources of the state, and I believe that the objective is to redevelop communities that have peculiar challenges, such as Angleton, such as St. Barnabas, such as Bain and Grantstown, such as Centerville. I think they are what are described as inner city communities. But Angleton has not been included. And I think that certainly the people of Angleton, and I speak for them, would be very, very curious to understand the rationale why, at this moment, they are not included in the dialogue of an initiative involving public finances and relief. And Mr. Speaker, I want to reiterate, one side of 3rd Street is Angleton, the other side is St. Barnabas, and the street only this big. So I am trying to figure out what is the rationale, Mr. Speaker, for it. And I'm sure there is a good one. I'm not making any assertion. But I think that the people of Angleton would wish to know why it is that in this initiative, which involves, I assume, benefits for people in these communities, why they are not at this moment included in the dialogue, Mr. Speaker. And so I want to express a concern. I'm not sure what the details of the initiatives are at all. And it may be, you know, I don't know what they are. But certainly if the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is engaging an initiative to target inner city community residents and bring benefits and relief,
should be invited,
that the people of Angleton should be similarly included. And so that was quite a stark thing. And I'm sure there is a good reason for that thing. But I think the people of Angleton would like to know what is the reason why they have not been included of the 4 communities, why you only have the 3, and that one has been excluded, Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, the member statements are certainly not the place for contentious debate, and so I take the concern of the member as seeking information, and in that regard, I just want to respond that it isn't the intention of the government to define in this initial approach an area that we want to start. And I think that the flyer reflects the overall intent of starting. But having said that, Mr. Speaker, the member is absolutely correct that Angleton is equally as challenged in terms of its infrastructure and economic environment as these other constituencies are. And to that extent, we would certainly want to correct that flyer so that it does reflect the openness of the dialogue that we hope to have about what the government intends to do with respect to all over-the-hill constituencies. It would have been an oversight, and I want to to formally issue an apology to the member for Engliston and the people of Engliston, so that they know that it certainly was no intention to slight or to omit them. It's just a matter of there is a phased approach to what we intend to do, and I believe that was the genesis of how that flyer was generated. But again, I want to encourage them, all residents of the named constituencies as well as Engliston, to please do come out and participate, share your ideas and your concerns. This is about all of us. And this is about assisting and providing relief and improving the lives in a tangible way. All of the residents of these inner city communities in a very holistic way. So no constituency left behind, Mr. Speaker, whether they're represented by the government side or the opposition side. This is about transforming communities and ultimately transforming lives. Thank you.
Appointment of select committees. Instructions to select committees. Discharge of select committees. Notices for future meetings. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Angliston.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to give notice of the following questions to be asked of the Minister of Social Services and Community Development. Will the Minister of Social Services and Community Development confirm that the office of the Department of Social Services in Bimini is closed? 2, will the Minister advise whether it is the intention of this government to reopen that office? 3, will the Minister advise what steps have been taken and will be taken to assure that the needs of persons requiring social assistance are to be met? Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Order that the questions be brought up.
Yeah. Sorry for that.
Order that the document do lie on the table. Further notices for future meetings.
Speaker, all other notices standing in need of Her Majesty's loyal opposition remain. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I stand to renew all matters in the name of the government of the Bahamas and do move that the House do adjourn until Wednesday, the 13th of December, 2017 at 10 a.m.
Is there a second now? It has been moved and seconded that the business of the House do adjourn to Wednesday, the 13th of December at 10 a.m. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of the House. Honorable Member for Bambutown.
Mr. Speaker, I do now move on final adjournment motion that the House do now adjourn.
Yes. It's been moved and seconded that the House now adjourns. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will rise. The business of this House stands adjourned until Wednesday, the 13th of December at 10 a.m.